We did change the metal to a dark bronze color, previously the black metal. We changed that to dark bronze. We changed the dark gray stucco to a warmer brown, and then changed the brick color to be a little more rosier than what we previously had. It's a little bit tough to see. I don't know, hopefully on your screen you can tell the difference. But previously we had the dark black curtain wall and metal panel accents, and then more of a yellow brick. And then now we're proposing something that's a little rosier in color and warmer. We shared these changes with the representatives that we had met with, and they received them warmly. One other thing that's been talked a little bit about is the height of the first floor. And I'd like to share this diagram to kind of show where we're getting these numbers from, where that height is being generated. So we have a 19 feet floor-to-floor height. But because of the overhangs and the cantilevering that we have to do with the concrete construction, we actually end up with some fairly deep structural elements that we have to have clearances around. We need both, because we have units above a retail, we also have to have a fairly hefty sound acoustic treatment in there that needs to work, as well as clearance for both ductwork and lighting and all that sort of thing, and maintain what the developer has requested from us is a 14-foot floor-to-floor, or ceiling height, 14-foot clear ceiling height, which is a typical retail ceiling height, just for the flexibility of his leasing. I would like to point out that the actual perceived height is probably closer to 15 feet rather than the full 19. And that's because it's 15 feet to the bottom side of those overhangs, which is really, if you look at this image, that's the bottom of our brick elements on the second level there. All right, so that perceived height is only 15 feet, not a full 19. If you have any questions, I'm certainly available to answer them. But otherwise, I think that concludes my presentation.
Thank you. I don't see any questions.
Thanks, Jesse. My name is Clark Gasson. I live at 3337 Eldorado Trail. I've developed some very high-profile developments in our city, like historic Florence Court, the Edgewater on Lake Calhoun, and the Walkway. I want to thank everyone from the city staff, my development team, and especially the neighborhood for pushing our design team to create a world-class building that complements the Linden Hills neighborhood. Before we purchased this property, my ownership group really did our due diligence on the history of the site and really understood past approvals from the city on the site. We truly wanted to respect all parties involved and really concentrate on the following areas. We studied past approvals from the previous developer to make sure our project was shorter in height and not as big, so we decided not to purchase the adjacent property. And by doing this, we're only developing the Famous Dave site. Again, the other approved projects on the site had more parcels included, and we do not. Our project is not that large. We also felt it was important to create more usable pocket park by not building right up to the property line and extending the pocket park by over 50%, where the previous project did not do this. Create a better pedestrian feel, as we are not building our building all the way up to our property line on Upton or 43rd. This will give a more generous sidewalk and walking experience. And we also removed the curb cut on 43rd Street. We're also including community public parking in our project on the first floor. To be very clear, the project we are talking about today is shorter and much smaller in size and massing, as we didn't purchase the adjacent property from past approvals from the city. During our first talks with the city about our development, they made it very clear we needed to follow the small area plan, and including my legal team, we believe this development is doing that. At the Planning Commission, we were asked to set back the west side of our fourth floor, and by doing this, we lost an apartment unit. This really had a negative effect on our underwriting, and this request isn't consistent with the small area plan, so I'm asking for reconsideration of this unit and in return, we are willing to lower our retail 1 foot. In the past week, we've had great conversations with one of the groups here today appealing our project, and we believe after these conversations, they truly understand the project better, and we want to continue these talks by having additional meetings on the pocket park, building material, and color selections. Our development team cares. We want to do the right thing, and I think my past work in our city has proven that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Any questions? So now I think we'll move through the appeals in the order they're listed here. So why don't we start with Ms. Pepin?
Morning, my name's Stanford Hill. I'm with the Bassford Remley Law Firm here in town. The concerned citizens hired me to open the presentation for them. And essentially, they asked me to do a 30,000-foot flyover of their position, their opposition to this project, and then to speak specifically about the small neighborhood plan and its impact on this project. In that regard, I would commend to you some of the presentations or the written submissions that the concerned citizens have filed. In particular, a letter from Pat Smith. Mr. Smith goes through the requirements for the CUP for this project and discusses each requirement that you as a panel have to decide on, and discusses why this project does not comply with the requirements for the CUP. The pictures that the architect put up are beautiful building, but the question is that building consistent with the height and scale and type of neighborhood that we're dealing with here? And in that regard, the concerned citizens want the panel to be assured that we are in favor of development, but that development that is consistent with the scale and character of this neighborhood. So again, Mr. Smith goes through and details each of the qualifications for a CUP and discusses why this project does not meet those qualifications. Mr. Pitt, who's going to speak after me, submitted a lengthy document to you where he does a side-by-side analysis of the staff report and all of the conclusions and assumptions that the staff made in coming out in favor of this project. There are a lot of improper assumptions made. There are, for instance, the statement made this morning that there are 7-story buildings in the neighborhood. Again, we are talking about a C1 commercial node here, and the 7-story building that the staff is referring to is in a different zoning district and blocks away from this project. As CPED noticed or mentioned or found during its analysis, 20 of the 22 buildings in the surrounding neighborhood to this proposed project are 1 to 1.5 and 2 stories in height. In particular, Mr. Pitt discusses the shadowing study. And shows 2 slides side by side of unacceptable 3-story structure and the proposed 4-story structure. Obviously, the difference in shadows between a 3rd and a 4th story are at the end of the shadow. And the finding you have to make is, what is the impact of that difference in shadow length? That simply can't be determined when the end of the shadow is off of the slides, for both slides. So what the city staff was left to do, and what you are left to do based on this shadow study, is to assume the difference between the 3- and 4-story buildings. And the city staff went on and made the assumption that the difference in those 2 shadow studies would not be that significant. That's an insufficient basis for a factual determination that the shadow effect of this 4-story building would not impact the surrounding neighborhoods on that basis alone, because all findings must be in favor of the CUP. The CUP should be denied. Mr. Pitt's entire presentation goes through the city council or the city planner's recommendations and discusses all of the factual conclusions and assumptions that are improper. Ms. Pepin, who will also speak after me, has submitted for your consideration what I would consider as a lawyer approaching a legal brief. And she does an in-depth analysis of all of the requirements of the CUP, all of the requirements under the city ordinance that you have to find, and all of the requirements for the 2 variances for this project, and argues persuasively that the conditions are not met. Finally, I would submit that the findings of fact and recommendation that was issued by this panel in connection with the previous project are persuasive on the issue of height. Yes, that project was for a larger mass, but the height was almost identical to this project, and the eventual report and recommendation was that the CUP for that property be denied because of the height. The only thing that has changed in the interim is the small area plan, and that's what they asked me to speak about. Because the suggestion taken directly from the plan that the neighborhood and the concerned citizens support a 4-story building on this site for this project is simply wrong. The small neighborhood plan, the genesis for that plan was the previous 56-foot project. After approval for that was turned down, the concerned neighbors went to their elected representatives and said, what can we do to make sure that we aren't standing here today opposing a project of identical height? We put a lot of time and man-hours into opposing the project because of height, and we don't want to be in the same position down the road. And it's suggested to us, to the concerned citizens, do a small neighborhood plan. Set forth your goals and visions for that neighborhood, for that unique commercial node known as Linden Hills. And if that's adopted by the city council, that becomes part of the government fabric for how future development will take place at this site in that C1 commercial node. And CPED, in its overview of the building and small area plan process, makes numerous references to the fact that the neighborhood's overriding concern was height. In a pedestrian-friendly commercial node where the majority of the buildings are 1 to 2 stories in height, a 4-story building of 56 feet is more than twice as tall as the nearest building. It's completely out of character, and it's exactly what the community did not want when they drafted the small neighborhood plan. And it wasn't until after the public comment period when they were told by their council person that the city attorney has opined that having height limits in small neighborhood plans is not acceptable. And because it's unenforceable, it has to be removed from the plan. One of the things I did after being retained is try to find legal support for that position, that small neighborhood plans cannot contain height limitations. I was not able to find any. But in any event, it wasn't until after the neighborhood had spent $60,000 and 16 months creating a plan to limit height. And again, it was based upon the previous project's height that they did this whole process, that suddenly they were told that the height restriction had to be removed. And for the small neighborhood plan now to be turned on its head and used against the neighborhood to say, well, we're only giving you what you wanted with this plan, is to subvert that process. I'm going to turn the podium over to the other speakers, but again, I commend their materials to you. This project does not meet all the requirements for the CUP. It does not meet all the requirements for the proposed variances, and the appeal should be granted.
Okay, thank you. So we have a second appeal. Could one representative from the second appeal please come on up and speak? And then I'll move through the list of people who have signed in.
I think there were additional speakers hoping to speak on the first appeal.
We have additional speakers. We've signed it.
I suppose we could handle each appeal separately. It seems a little. Yeah. So for the additional speakers, each person will have 2 minutes. If people feel they can separate themselves into each different appeal, and then I guess we'll have anyone who isn't here to speak on one of the specific appeals at the end.
Madam Chair, just in the interest of clarity, because it sounds like there's not clarity, I think you were doing a good thing by trying to have the main speaker for each appeal speak first and then have all of the testimony. But I understand there's confusion about that now. So you're moving in just to be clear, you're moving in the direction of the first appeal. The primary speaker spoke. Every additional speaker can speak for 2 minutes. Then we'll move to the second appeal. I think your way was better, but I understand what now seems to be happening.
If I may. I'm not It's fine with me if you go ahead.
Thank you.
All right. So each additional speaker who is speaking to the points in the first appeal has 2 minutes, and Council Member Johnson will be timing you.
Okay, I'm going to have to talk really fast. My name is Constance Pepin, and I do need to take a couple seconds and clarify that my appeal group was not represented in any discussions, although we did try to communicate with the developer before the appeals. So the whole concept of communicating with the neighborhood, I think, needs to come through our city council member in order to be valid going forward. This is Linden Hills. Please grant the appeal. The reasons to deny the project are many, and I don't have time to go into all of them. But the speaker before me did a very good job, and I do hope you read the memo because it does show that basically it doesn't meet the required criteria, and it does not comply, in fact, with the Minneapolis plan. It also effectively rezones the area. So a few ways that it doesn't meet, and there are many more. It's injurious. It's not consistent with the applicable port policies. It blocks access to light and air. It shadows, and it's out of scale and character. This is Linden Hills, in case you haven't been there lately. Here's another picture. Notice the two-story buildings. Look at this. This is very injurious. This is what the neighbor behind the building will see from his backyard. In fact, the building on the right is the one-story building that it completely swallows up. This is injurious. Please note the building on the left, the one-story building that is all but obliterated by this building. Please note the building on the right, the two-story building, which again is all but obliterated by this out-of-scale, out-of-character building, out of character. Very injurious towers above properties. The design and materials are completely out of scale and character. And again, it effectively upzones C1 node to C2 illegally. Here's more pictures of Linden Hills. This is how it really looks. This is how it really looks. This is how it shouldn't look. This is out of character. This is out of scale completely. This is not consistent with the TMP, which says you preserve the stability and diversity of the city's neighborhoods and support the continued presence of small-scale neighborhoods serving retail and commercial services. All these land use policies that were stated as being compliant, it's not. The small area plan says that we want to preserve the small-scale buildings characterized by modest width and height. The vision that you've seen, keep and enhance what makes the neighborhood, commercial districts unique, ensure appropriately scaled development, renovation and new development support and enhance the existing scale and character of the neighborhood. It's not consistent with the LSAP. It doesn't match the vision goals. It ignores guidance for transition and setbacks. It does the 3 or 4 stories spin that is going to be talked about even more in the future. And there's a bias on the Planning Commission and on your committee that Linden Hills won't be satisfied with anything, and that is not true. Here's a building that was approved with no voice or no opposition or complaint at all from the neighborhood for the same identical site. This building was approved with no problems from the neighborhood. So it's not true. And I know that some of you have a bias that, you've been at this so long that you're not going to be satisfied with anything. We will be. And the next picture shows how I'm feeling right now. It's a personal note about this is how I feel that city government looks like to me.
Thank you.
We are not lawyers. We are a highly engaged community in support of appropriate development. Our preference is abundantly clear for the C1 node permitted 3-story 42 maximum. We spent $60,000 on a small area plan. Most of the participants said that we wanted it to stay at 3 stories. Please grant the appeal.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you. If anyone else would like to speak on the first appeal, please come up, state your name and address for the record.
Hi, my name is Walt Pitt, 3804 Upton Avenue South. I'd like to say that the Planning Commission has erred in its approval of the conditional use permit because the cut will be injurious to the use and enjoyment of the surrounding properties. The staff's false standard of injury and enjoyment as being the residence distance of 70 feet away from a shared property line is not the legal standard for the use and enjoyment of one's property. We have provided evidence that the properties adjacent to the building are in use and being enjoyed. Here is, just so you can see, these are, I don't know, it's a little dark, but there you can see the adjacent properties right there. Those are the adjacent properties. 2-story, a single family residence, 1-story coffee shop, 2-story office building. These are the pictures of the use of the property most immediately adjacent. And within this fall 70-foot standard, there are solar lighting, there is dedicated dining and cooking areas, there's work, play, and privacy issues. This picture right here shows, actually that's the bedroom of the resident. This is a shed, a working shed that's in the 70 feet. You can see the back of it. There's ladders, there's things like that. So that's the residence. There's also more pictures, and I'll show you there's flowers, there's edible plants in that yard. There's bird houses, and there's gardening that goes up to the fence line, which is the property line right here. The Planning Commission has also erred in granting the approval of the variances because the circumstance of the 4 stories on which all the calculations are based was created by the applicant who has an interest in the property and who does not meet the legal standard of practical difficulty. The variances are only needed because the applicant has chosen to exceed the maximum allowed height permitted of 3 stories in the C1 site by choosing to apply for 4 stories. The 3-story maximum allowed height permitted in the C1 is compliant with the density goals of the Minneapolis Plan for Sustainable Growth. 3 stories is compliant with these issues of the TMP, and that's stated by Brian Schaefer, the CPED manager of Linden Hills Small Area Plan, in the Linden Hills Small Area Plan briefing on key content issues by Brian Schaefer.
Thank you, Mr. Pitt.
What?
Can you finish up? The time is up.
No. The regulatory recent, the 2 minutes gone by already?
Yes.
Okay, well, I'm almost done and I have
Final
something
thought,
prepared.
please.
I won't be that long. The regulatory on recent project-based context regarding building heights says here, the regulatory framework and recent building examples indicate that desired levels of density are achievable at 3 stories. It also has pictures of those buildings, and it says the CPED project manager had concerns over the building height in this draft of the plan, but ultimately the recommendation was consistent with the policies of the TMP, albeit not fully consistent with CPED's interpretations of those policies.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Pitt.
No, I have a couple things more to do.
The next speaker.
I
can come
feel
on
that
up.
there is an appearance of conflict of interest and previous bias of the 2 zoning and planning committee members. I would like to remind you that you are bound to vote based on the directors of the Minneapolis Plan for Sustainable Growth and the zoning ordinances and not your opinions in this matter. Lisa Goodman has prior bias. In a article on November 27, 2013, she stated, you're going to see changes in the neighborhoods are going to be need to focus on development. You're talking 4 stories per building where there is one. That's a prior bias. Also, there were campaign contributions to Lisa
Sir,
Goodman from
your
Faye
time
and
is up.
Benson, and two, as well as to Lisa Bender, and 2 of those people who gave money to their contribution, are Wynn Rockwell and Nick Bergerino, who both now sit on the Planning Commission with Lisa Bender. And actually, Wynn Rockwell doesn't, but his son does. So that's also a conflict of interest.
We've been extremely
Fabian
patient with your
Baker
testimony,
Daniels is
and you're not
represented by
even
Carol
speaking
Lansing, also,
to
who
the-
works in that building. The
to the
last thing I would like to
applications that are
say
in
to
front of
wrap
us
up
or the
is,
appeal.
I'd like to say, the purpose of the Linden Hills Small Area Plan creates a framework for residents to influence neighborhood improvement or development projects. That is the purpose of the Small Area Plan. Heights or 3 stories are allowed in Linden Hills. We've had a lot about this from this council and from other councils about the 3 or 4 stories are allowed in Linden Hills. That's us saying that 30 or 55 miles per hour are allowed in the city of Minneapolis. Every licensed driver knows that you can't go 55 miles per hour on a 30 mile per hour residential street because we have speed limits. In Linden Hills, we have zoning regulations, or at least we do up to now. And in closing, I would like to say that I've been here since the beginning, and we started the small area plan to protect our neighborhood. We paid $60,000 for that small area plan, and in the end, now we're sitting here and you've told us that you've sold us a coat that will not protect us from the cold. So that's it. Thank you for your time.
Next speaker for the first appeal, please come on up and state your name and address for the record. Really ask that people respect our time and stick to the 2 minutes, and please try not to repeat what has already been said, and to please keep your remarks germane to the appeal in front of us.
My name is Kristen Tombers. I'm at 4307 Upton Avenue South. That's Clancy's Meats. I've been up here several times. Want y'all to know several people thanked me and all of us who keep coming down here for these appeals. A lot of people can't be here for these. The message I guess I want y'all to know is that there are a lot of people that find this disconnect staggering. Almost 500 signatures have been signed for this time around on a petition, well over 2,000 last time with one of the other developments that was out of scale, out of character. Neighbors don't want this 4-story. The building simply does not fit. C1 zone does not allow this 4-story. It didn't anyway before the language was changed. The small area plan did say no height at this 50, whatever it is. Clearly the 4-story and the character of that building does not fit at that intersection. To reiterate a well-used phrase, and one that was used by a Michigan congresswoman in the Planned Parenthood hearings just recently, saying that something is true over and over and over again doesn't make it true. 4 stories does not fit on that corner. I wish if it would be better, I think, for all of us, if you would just admit that you know that, but that you're going to do it anyway. Because I think we all know that that height and that character does not fit that corner. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak on the first appeal? Please come up, state your name and address for the record.
Good morning, members of the Minneapolis City Council. My name is Bob Roscoe. My address is 1401 East River Parkway, Minneapolis, and I support the appeal. I'm a strong advocate of increased density when it is appropriate, but not density at all costs. The proposed height restrictions of the neighborhood residential character, I think, is being abrogated by this proposal. These setting back the upper stories is a useful tool in architecture design and dealing with density, but it does not work in this case. The small area plan, as other speakers said, was really not followed. But I think another concern here is that I have been involved in coming to these council meetings before most of you were on the council from the early 1970s. And I'm concerned about neighborhoods. A lot of my work is involved with them. In the 70s, there really wasn't such a thing as citizen participation other than just nodding your head and saying yes. But a lot of us neighborhood residents and activists worked with the city council and members of planning groups, and we got citizen participation to be a legitimate voice in affecting the decision making for neighborhoods. I see that being peeled back right now, and it really bothers me. And I think that's really happening with this process, with this project. The proposed design is out of scale. I think everybody knows that. It's so evident. I'm sorry I had to repeat it. Linden Hills is not Houston.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak on the first appeal? Okay, we'll move to the second appeal. We'll give this group, again, one speaker who can speak a little bit longer if there's one representative who'd like to speak on the second appeal. Oh, on the first appeal. Come on up. Sure.
I was trying to make sure I wouldn't be too repetitive. My name is Laura Furster. I live at 2614 West 49th Street. I've grown up in the neighborhood and in Linden Hills for my whole life. I just wanted to say that everybody is here today doing their best and doing their jobs. The group who is in support of the appeal, including myself, I've been involved in these discussions and meetings since